So
I'm Matthew Schutte. Nice to meet you all.
yay! So, okay, the first thing that I want to just do is just get this out in the open. Okay, there's so much buzz about the blockchain and Bitcoin and what's happening with cryptocurrency and what is cryptocurrency and why is cryptocurrency. But the big one right away is what's the difference between Holochain and blockchain, and why does it matter? Is that okay place to start?
That was a lot.
I know, but we'll just go with that last bit, okay? Does that seem like a good place to start for all of you? Okay.
Well, I'll start with the why.
Why?
Because our why is different. So instead of trying to do digital anonymous cash, which is what Bitcoin was focused on, and the blockchain was a design that came out of Bitcoin. So we weren't trying to do digital anonymous cash. We were trying to enable new forms of social coordination. So we were trying to enable people to collaborate in ways that worked for them.
Can you hear him? Okay.
Yeah? Okay. Because if not, we can grab mics. Okay. And I'll try to project as well a little bit more.
Okay, sorry.
So today, when we try to collaborate, when we're at really small scales, no problem. Hey, you want to do something? Sure, no problem. We're able to collaborate in ways that we are capable of steering ourselves at small scale. But when we get into bigger group sizes, in order to orchestrate that collaboration, we almost always put some administration in the middle. We almost always put some smaller group of people in the middle. You can call them the CEO, you can call them the president, but that group of folks ends up sort of sculpting how this larger community is going to operate. It is a concentration of power, and it's just a side effect of how we collaborate today. We were really focused on enabling sort of bottom-up collaboration, even at very large scale. And what we mean by that is collaboration where parties themselves are choosing, yeah, this is the game I want to play. These are the ways in which I want to constrain myself. If we were playing a card game, well, in a card game, you're constraining yourself. You're saying, I'm only going to hold on to 5 cards. I'm only going to pick up 1 card when I put down another. Right? Those are rules that you're choosing to play by, and when each of the participants plays by those rules, we're able to play a game together. We're able to do some particular set of activities together. We're able to coordinate in a particular way. We wanted that kind of opt-in collaboration or coordination to be available at even really large scale. And so we designed a new architecture, a new way of building and running applications that is able to be held by the participants themselves. It's able to be run just using the participants themselves, deciding, yes, I want to play that pattern. Yes, I want to play that game. So a simple way to frame that is, we created a way to build and run peer-to-peer applications. But the implication of that is we enable what we call mutual sovereignty. Each of us choosing to play a game together, and if at some point I go, this isn't working for me, I have the ability to change. I have the ability to take that data, that information, and go play with other folks by some different set of rules. Or I have the ability to extend to be playing this game here, but to also pay attention to something else as well. And for us, that felt pretty powerful. We were trying to basically change how humans collaborate, or enable them to collaborate in some richer ways, because we think that that's needed in order to handle the very complex challenges that we're facing.
You got that?
Sort of. It's a little long. Sorry.
No, I think we need long.
Okay.
I think long is good.
All right.
So this collaboration is structured in such a way that different perspectives can be recognized. And that is what separates this or differentiates this in some ways from blockchain.
Yeah, so I'm biased, obviously, right? I'm here representing Holochain, and I'm a true believer. But the way that I would frame blockchain, I'd start with the problem that they were trying to solve. They were trying to do digital anonymous cash, and there's a key part of that, anonymous. They wanted to enable people to transact, to send something like money to one another, without having to know who they were interacting with, without having to have any information about who it was that they were interacting with. And so because that was the problem they tried to solve, their way of solving it was, let's make it so you can trust the network, you can trust the overall process. You don't have to actually have any sort of relationship with these other folks. What that forces them into is, we need to come up with a way to generate one truth for the network. So blockchain's innovation was that they took a whole bunch of different computers that are in different places in the world, and they, because of that fact, they see events happening in different orders. This is Einstein's theory of general relativity. There is no absolute ordering of events. And what that means is, shoot, we don't have agreement about what the order in which these transactions occurred. We disagree about the ordering. And they went, how can we create agreement there? What they did was they go, we'll just pick one to be true. Every 10 minutes, we'll have one party win a little lottery, and that party gets to say what the truth was for that 10-minute period of history. And the order of events that they saw becomes the official ordering of events. It's literally a way of taking a distributed system and generating a centralized perspective. How? By throwing away 99.9% of what everybody saw. And going, no, what he saw is the truth. If you think about it, if all the people in this room, we've probably got 20 or 25 people in the room, if these 20 people saw a car accident, and then we started running towards a police station, and only the first person who got to that police station could give an account. It was what they saw that becomes the truth of the accident. That would seem kind of silly. But that's exactly what blockchain does. It's a way of generating, they call it consensus, by throwing away the bulk of the information in the system. There's some problems with that. Aside from the fact that you lose a lot of information, the problem is it takes a huge amount of time, it takes a huge amount of effort, it takes a huge amount of energy to figure out and decide what to throw away. The other issue there is, well, one thing, that makes it impractical for most things people are interested in solving. Like, people have gotten really excited about solving all kinds of problems with blockchain, and in general, nope, it doesn't work for almost any of those things. Because this process of us having to hold on to let me phrase it differently. Each full participant in a blockchain needs to hold on to a copy of everything that everyone else has done. So you have to hold on to a copy of everything that's happened, and I have to hold on to a copy of everything that's happened, and he does, and she does, and he does, if we want to be full participants. That's inherently non-scalable. It just doesn't work. This is why the people in the blockchain world are freaking out. They're trying to figure out how to solve this problem. They've baked into the architecture from the get-go a solution that isn't capable of handling scale. But the other thing is, you've got a phone there. You can't run a blockchain on that phone, not any substantial blockchain. you can't participate in Bitcoin with that phone. That phone doesn't have the capacity to be a full participant. Most of our devices don't have the capacity to be a full participant, which means blockchain actually, right from the get-go, creates two classes of citizens. You have full participants and you have everybody else. And the power in the system, the folks who actually make money, but also who get to set the rules, are the people who have the ability to participate as full participants. They own a data mining operation, they have access to cheap electricity, they've gotten specialized hardware. So it immediately creates a concentration of power. They were interested in doing decentralized computing. They were interested in getting away from concentrations of power, but your intent doesn't dictate what you're going to get. The architecture does. And the architecture had baked into it, well, shoot, it's really heavy because we have to hold on to all of this stuff and we have to check with everybody else. And since not every device is capable of doing that, we just created a two-class system that by nature concentrates power. And the folks who were in early, they make a bunch of dough and they reinvest that, and there's not a whole lot of Bitcoin billionaires out there. Right? There's a very small number who are basically steering the entire system. Holochain is different. We designed Holochain in a way that doesn't require the winning a lottery, or what they call in the Bitcoin world mining, and it doesn't require cryptocurrencies. Cryptocurrencies were there to incentivize people to do this work of checking and adding records to the official record. The way that Holochain works, when I show up with my device, I show up as both a user and a host. I've got all of the rights, but I also have all of the responsibilities of running that application. Now, every Holochain app is its own application. It's a separate thing. There's not... Whoops.
It's mine.
That's classic.
I thought you had your...
I thought I did too.
Shall I
just turn it off. Yeah, there we go. Sorry.
Maybe you...
Thank you.
Sorry.
So, there's no one big Holochain where the data all gets stored and the applications all talk to. That's not how it works. A Holochain is a pattern that anyone can use for building and running their application. So every application has its own separate set of rules, members, shared storage space. It's a community. If you and I are doing a Twitter-like Holochain, great. We're holding on to data that has to do with short messages. And that's the game that we're playing together. If we're doing an Airbnb-like Holochain, great, that's something separate. But those are two separate applications. When we run a Holochain application, we show up as users with the rights as well as the responsibilities, meaning sometimes when you tweet, that piece of information lands on my device and 15 others or 20 others, and each device checks, hey, according to my copy of the rules, does this play by the rules? And if it does, great. I state that what I saw played by the rules, and I sign that in a way that others can check. That doesn't mean it's true. It's not added to the official record. It means that I'm claiming that looks like it's playing by the rules. And randomly, a bunch of other people in the network are checking it as well. Well, that makes it so that I only end up holding on to the tweets that I do, and maybe about, let's say, 20 times the tweets of an average user. And we're able to run this application without anybody in the middle. That this app is able to be run using just the devices of the users themselves. So it's lightweight enough to run just on cell phones and laptops and desktops, etc. We don't have to have specialized equipment. We don't have to have hardware. And the incentive to participate isn't that I'm going to get paid. It's that I get to participate. It's similar to the incentive for learning a language. Who here speaks a foreign language? Why did you learn it? Because you wanted to speak it. You wanted to be able to communicate with people in that language, right? Was there somebody paying you? For most of us, probably not, right? No one was paying you to learn French or German or English or whatever. You learned it so that you could have that capacity. You remember it, you hold on to it in order to be able to play that game, to communicate in that way. we see applications the same way. That if you make it lightweight enough, that the reason that you would participate in that game is because you want to play that game. That's the incentive that you need. So I'll leave that as the
Okay,
answer for now.
let's check in with the room and see if there are questions or feedbacks or confusions emerging yet.
So how do you verify that information is sent between like two entities, that it's correct and not corrupted?
Sure. So this requires a little bit of a dive into the architecture, and I'll try not to go too deep because I don't want this to become a deeply technical talk. Though you can learn a lot more about this stuff on our website and in our online community, which I'll put up the link for later. But that's chat.holochain.net. We have 4 parts of a Holochain application. So the first one is shared code. If you and I and Nora are running peer-to-peer Twitter, we have identical code for that application running on our devices. If I change that code even one tiny little bit, I add a space somewhere, it becomes obvious to both of you. And you will treat me as if I'm not running the same app as you are. You'll treat me as an outsider, not somebody playing the game that you're playing. Right? The second thing, so this is shared code. The second thing, identity. Anytime someone creates or initializes their copy of a Holochain app, so I set up Twitter, at that moment of creation, I set up an identity, essentially a public-private key pair. We don't have to go into the details there. But this set of keys, one of which I share and one of which I hold on to, gives us some capabilities. It gives you or anybody else in the community the ability to send me private information that only I could read. It gives me the ability to sign things and others to be able to check, hey, was that signed by the person who had that private key? Meaning me. And it also gives us an address in our shared storage space, which we'll get into in a second. So the 2 big ones there are, you can send me private stuff, and I can sign things that others can check. Now, that doesn't mean you know anything about me beyond this app, but it does enable us to have me tweet again, and tweet again, and others go, that's the same party taking those actions. It enables me to build up reputation. It enables you to assess who it is that you're dealing with in this context. 3, we've got what we call a local source chain, which basically means I'm going to hold on to my own copy of the actions that I have participated in this application. So I've got, in this local source chain, the first thing is actually the code of the app. We have the fingerprint of that code, which is, we call it a hash. But that's why if you change it even a little bit, it creates a completely different fingerprint, and we're not running the same app. And it's easy for people to check. It's just a little tiny thing. The second one is my identity information. And then after that, it's just all content. My username is going to be, okay, I'm tweeting, I'm following somebody. Ooh, I don't like following them anymore. Let me drop them. Tweet. And every time I do one of those actions, my device, I hit tweet, and what happens in the background is my device checks my own copy of the rules. Hey, is this more than 140 characters? Is it signed by the right person? Yep. And I write it onto my local device. Now we're storing that in what we call a tamper-resistant log, meaning we're including a little link to the previous information, which after you start sharing this stuff, it makes it so that if I went back and tried to change any of that history, it would become visible. This is the same pattern that the blockchain is making use of. It's called hash chains. We're using it too. But instead of holding one big global hash chain where each of us is holding onto a copy of what everybody did, we're holding local hash chains. I'm holding onto copies of what I did, so I've got my own data, which means it's easy for me to, if I ever want to walk away and take my data with me. Okay, the 4th part, shared storage space. Well, for this, instead of having everyone hold onto a copy of everything, we have a handful of folks hold on to backups of the content. And we're using the same pattern that BitTorrent and many other peer-to-peer file sharing systems use. That's called a distributed hash table. Without going into a ton of detail, it's basically a technology that's been around for a couple of decades that solves the problem of, hey, if we've got a bunch of people here and I want to put some content into the system, and later somebody's going to want to pull it out of the system, where do we put it? Recognizing that people are dropping off of and joining the network on an ongoing basis. How do we decide where to put this? So that even though people are dropping off of the network, others will be able to find it when they look for it. And the idea was, oh, you actually put it into the network based on the content itself. You run it through a little algorithm, it spits out a fingerprint. Each of these participants has a fingerprint based on their identity, so their public key. You run it through a hash algorithm and it spits out a fingerprint, and you compare them. I go, this piece of content, is it closer to your address or my address? Oh, it's closer to yours. You know, if she was a 7 and I was a 2 and this is a 6, it's closer to her. Oh, but if she's a 7, oh, it's closer to her, right? And the content literally gets passed around, the hash gets passed around the network until it finds who is closest to it. Now in a Holochain app, you can decide how many copies do we want. If you wanted 1 copy, okay, that person gets it. If you wanted 20 copies, the 20 closest, not geographically closest, but closest in terms of their address, would hold on to that. When each of them receives that, they go, yep, I'm supposed to hold on to this. Send me the actual data. Because the thing that's been getting passed around is this little tiny number, basically. It's a little fingerprint. Send me the data. I send the tweet, and I send anything else that they might need to validate this. If this was a financial kind of transaction, it might include my entire history of transactions that I had done. And they then check their own copy of the rules to see if this action plays by the rules of the application. And if it does, she goes, yep, her device goes, yep, looks good to me, and signs it. That's not being added to the official record as true. It's her statement that this is true. And when I signed it, I was stating that this played by the rules of the game as well. So I said this is valid, she says this is valid. A bunch of other people say it's valid. Hey, that's pretty decent, considering that all of those parties were random members of the network. Now, if somebody starts to lie, if I start trying to pass bad data and she colludes with me, and she tries to pass bad data too, the other participants around her who are checking the rules themselves and going, no, this is bad, and then she goes, hey, I got some good stuff, and passes it along to them, well, they're going to see that she's trying to pass them and say that it's valid, something that they had checked and was not. And they are going to be able to raise a flag. Hey, everybody, she's passing bad data. But not only are they able to make that claim, they have the evidence. Because her signature, which only she would be able to create, is sitting on top of this statement. Look, this is valid. So they have evidence that somebody's behaving badly. Now, does this prevent people from behaving badly altogether? No. But it enables an immune system response. So we think of it as a really lightweight building block that enables you to create what we call intrinsic data integrity. Depending on your application, that alone might be good enough. But if you're trying to do $1 million transfers of funds, you probably want some more assurances, and you can add additional layers of security. You can add notaries, you could have a much higher number of parties needing to validate. You might have that someone's chain is locked up until a certain number of validations occur, meaning if I did a transaction with you, it's not until a bunch of people have said, yes, 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 this all looks good, that we consider it finalized. And it's only at that point that I'm able to try to interact with a next party and do another transaction. That's to prevent sort of the Holochain version of what the blockchain world would call a double spend. But that's not needed for every application, and so we've created the most lightweight Lego block that you can add other things on top of, rather than creating a one-size-fits-all balance of security, speed, scalability, etc. The one last piece I'll mention there is even though our transaction might be locked up, if there's a million other people running this application. They're all free to interact. The whole world isn't waiting on us to finish this transaction, unlike in a blockchain ecosystem. So you can have millions or even billions of simultaneous events occurring because it's a distributed system. We may be on pause for a moment as we finish this, but everybody else is able to go about their business. That's pretty long. It's pretty technical.
Are you okay? All right.
It's good with substance and like technical. So.
Okay.
Yes.
I'm sure we have a variety.
We
Some
need-
people,
yes.
some folks are going to be like, that went right. You know, I don't know any of those references, and other people are like, ooh, yes, good, good.
Well, I was just going to say let's zoom out now
Yeah.
for a little balance.
Yeah.
And recognize what that means to our lives, to the way we think about our lives, to the way that we are in society, not only with each other, but with the biosphere. So why does it matter that we have an app that can do all of that, that can reorganize our interactions in that way? Does that seem like a good question? Okay.
So I touched on a little bit of this earlier, but I'll try to dive in deeper. And I'll try to do it by contrasting what our current systems are capable of. So right now, we've got applications, right? We have Twitter and Facebook and those kinds of things. In fact, over the last decade or so, many of the most radical changes that have happened in our society have come about because of the rise of peer-to-peer applications. Peer-to-peer communication, Facebook, Twitter, etc. Peer-to-peer transportation, Uber, peer-to-peer hospitality, Airbnb, etc., 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 right? Except none of those are actually peer-to-peer systems. All of those are peer to monopoly to peer, right? If I want to send Nora a message in Facebook, I don't send it to Nora, I send it to Facebook, and Facebook sends it to Nora. And when she wants to reply, she replies to Facebook, and Facebook forwards it to me. And they're sitting in the middle. And we're all aware of this. This is no longer sort of a secret, and it's no longer just something that people aren't noticing or caring about. People are a little creeped out by the fact that everything is watched. Even if the fact that it's watched isn't all that bothersome, they're sort of not stoked. I'm a surfer, stoked. They're sort of not excited about the fact that their behavior is being manipulated or being sculpted by this entity. This became very visible in America with the election, right? That people's behavior, their perception, was being steered by other parties making use of a single algorithm, basically. When this group gets to decide how we can talk, and we decide, hey, I want to talk differently. Yes, these 140 character tweets are fine, but I want to send a calendar invite, or I want to do a 5-star rating, or I want to send a video or a photo. We don't get to decide that. We have to petition these guys to try to let us talk that way. Or we have to try to find another system that enables us to talk that way. And from our perspective, that doesn't work. That doesn't enable us to learn from our experiences. Because we'll experience, hey, this sucks. And we're left with, well, too bad. Right? Unless these guys think that it's okay to change, we're kind of screwed. There's another thing here, which is this is an application-centric world. It's a world where the app is the middle of the system. How many of you remember when smartphones first came around? How many of you, just prior to that, had a big booklet in the back of your car that was filled with maps of your city? Right? We had one in Los Angeles called the Thomas Guide. And you need to find a street, you look it up in the index, it says page 47, B2, you find it, and you navigate your way there. If you asked me 10, 15 years ago if I had a mapping problem, I would say, no, I've got maps. But when smartphones came along with GPS and Google Maps put you in the middle of the map and gave you directions the entire way to your destination, it felt very different. So different that it drove smartphone adoption. I would guess that if you had to pick one application to hold onto on your phone, it would probably still be the mapping app. Maybe not. Maybe there's something else that you're totally addicted to. But it was that useful. Why was it useful? It put you in the middle of the map. You were the center of the map. And it pulled in context-relevant information to help you steer. Well, our belief is Holochain is sort of like that for the internet. The internet right now has applications. And we run into one application, then we run back out. And we run into another, and we run back out. We run into another, and we run back out. How many of you feel like you're pulled in 40 different directions every day? Right? That's not like an accident. That's a result of that architecture. Every one of those organizations who are building those apps, and they're all organizations because they have to have a business model in order to support passing information between you and whoever you want to interact with. They're all trying to addict you to their service. They're trying to get you to spend as much time as possible in that application. And so they've got us like little lab rats, basically. Bing! Pay attention to me, pay attention to me. And we're being pulled into all these different places, virtual places, to do these interactions. Holochain's a little different. Because it puts you in the middle, it enables you to pull applications to you. It enables you to, I don't know, I have this experience every week where I'm like, okay, Bill sent me a message. Where was that? Was that text message? Was that Facebook? Was that email? Was that WhatsApp? Oh, it was my other email account? Right? How many of you have that happen? And it's because we've got all these different channels, and there's no way for us to pull them into one space that is our channel, that enables us to interact with them. Okay, so I haven't quite got to your question yet. By enabling individuals to play the games that they want to play and to connect them together, we enable them to be sensitive to the world in ways that work for them. We enable them to take things that they learn or can pull out of one space and write them into another, and maybe extract more information out. And it enables us to connect together different areas of the world that we want to pay attention to so that we can get richer information. We can cross the perspectives of these different spaces and get richer information to help us make a decision. Simple example, not about the biosphere, unfortunately, but relatable. If a bunch of us are playing peer-to-peer Airbnb, we got 5 stars, how good was that host? That's great. Now, not everybody might want to pay attention to or rate how many stars do you give the smell of the house. So we might, as a whole community, we might not adopt that additional tool. But some of us might decide, yeah, that's an important one for me. And so we might set up a separate application that's just that, just rating how was the smell on a 5-star thing. And another tool for, was it noisy there? And another tool for how talkative was the host. And when we look up a place, and we get back the identity in that system of the user, our app can just automatically write that into these other spaces and go, give me the information about how loud it was, how smelly it was, etc. And for me, I can see all of those things as if it's one application. The front end makes sense to me. It's just one single space that's integrating between these different applications. And as a result, I'm able to make richer sense of the world without having had to go through the bureaucracy of getting everybody who's playing this game to agree to that upgrade. That we're able to sort of independently bridge and add new information or find new information that's relevant to us. Okay, bio stuff? Should I go there? You want to repeat the question, and now with that context, might it make more sense? Or
Okay, let me
yeah,
let me just say what's
inside of you.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm suspicious.
Mhm.
Okay, I'm suspicious because I'm not exactly sure, and I think I've said this to you verbatim before, what the difference is between collective intelligence and complicit corruption.
Talking about complicit corruption.
Okay. Complicit corruption happens accidentally. Okay, it's not in the intention, most likely.
Yeah.
But it is there, and it feeds into a system. I work in systems. This is I don't even want to call them systems anymore, but anyway, so let's look, for example, at the Harvey Weinstein situation.
Mm.
Okay, why did no one say anything for decades? Why?
Mm.
Was there a rule that they shouldn't say anything? Why didn't they say?
So people did say they weren't able to be heard.
And they weren't able to be heard, or they didn't say, or the people who should have didn't. Anyway, what happened to that information? Because I think that if we take this notion of information in living systems, and we look at it in a living system, it gives us a little bit of contrast to say what's happening here, right?
Yeah.
So what happened?
Mm.
And what happened was there were some understandings that weren't explicit that had to do with people's careers, the possibility of their careers, the possibility of ruining their careers, the possibility of proximity to celebrity and fame, and just that's fun, that people were, as individuals, getting something out of it that they weren't willing to risk for the sake of the integrity of the system itself. Okay, now, global scale, I'm pretty sure that's what we're looking at in terms of the general complicit corruption of capitalism. There, I just said that like it was nothing. And the fact that, it's perfectly reasonable that we should make profit and thereby exploit and destroy our ecology and a good deal of our human brothers and sisters and thousands of other species. So there's a complicit corruption. And I'm concerned about that. I'm concerned about it in the system as it is in its status quo, because it seems only to reiterate and to keep breeding this idea. It was some couple of decades ago we started having, the green economy. That didn't work out. It didn't work out because in the heart of it there was still the notion that people should make money, and the money came from profit, and the profit came from, buying low and selling high, and there was exploitation, and somehow we have this escalating wealth gap, and here we are.
Yeah.
And so I'm interested in the concept that you mentioned of this holochain enabling a kind of sensitivity and perception. And I want you to expand on that.
Yeah.
Because I'm interested, and I hope all of you are too, and we're not boring you to tears, in what it means to have that perception. And one of the things that happened with the last election in the US, and I think with Brexit as well, was that perception got tweaked. And people got into their algorithms, their perception, and their ability to generate a broader sensitivity was limited. So how does Holochain, because I have a feeling this might be the key to how it links,
or a key.
A key
Yeah.
that links to...
We're the thing! Yeah.
Well, how it links to the biosphere and our ability to be better human beings, which we don't seem to just do on our own, sadly.
Yeah, so I'll start with the better human beings thing.
Yeah, start there.
So oddly enough, our group didn't take on as our challenge bringing enlightenment to individuals. that's not the level at which we're trying to play. We think that that's wonderful, but we don't think that enlightening individuals is going to get us there, because the problems that we're experiencing aren't individual problems. They are social problems. They are coordination problems. The system, as it's currently structured, which has a few parts, but one of them is capitalism. Another is political power. Political power really meaning, at the end of the day, the ability to wield violence. The ability to exercise the violent apparatus of the state to enforce preferences. Those are systems that concentrate power. Political power is pretty clear how it concentrates power. Only those who control the biggest thug, whether you call it military or police, only those folks get to dictate how things are going to be run, because they can sort of overpower anybody else. Monetary power, capital type power, is a little different. We talked about this a bit at the house before coming over here, but capitalism, we figured out a little over 100 years ago that capitalism is not a self-steering system. It's a system that leads to a race to the bottom on many fronts. It has some real amazing benefits, and the benefits are actually sense-making benefits. But those benefits come with big drawbacks as well, because they lead to lopsided sense-making. So what are the benefits? Well, the invisible hand. How many of you have heard of the invisible hand? Right? How does the invisible hand operate, i.e. the market sort of figuring things out? It's pretty simple when you think about it. The price of copper goes up. It could be because people are buying more copper. It could be because copper has become harder to come by. It could be because there's new regulations. Regardless, the price of copper goes up. Hey, some equipment that uses copper now also is going to have to go up, or the companies that are doing that are going to lose money and go out of business. So price of copper goes up, price of things that use copper go up, price of other things that use those pieces of equipment or services, they go up. And at the end of the supply chain, you're buying this comb or blue jeans or something. And you've got two options in front of you, and one of them is cheap and one of them is expensive, and you don't know why it's expensive. But you know it is. Price composes across the supply chain incredibly well. And at the end of the supply chain, you can see what's cheap. But you can't see why. The beautiful part of capitalism and just price in general is you don't have to know why. You can see what's cheap, and so this leads us to self-steer. The problem is, because you can't see why, you might be supporting slavery. You might be supporting a polluted river. The other information didn't compose as well. And so you end up with this lopsided signaling. We end up as a society supporting anything that's cheap, regardless of how it became cheap. And Upton Sinclair and the Jungle, it was a book written about the meatpacking industry in the United States and all of the horrible stuff that was going on there in terms of working conditions and health and people getting sick from the food that was being produced, helped spur political action in the US and elsewhere, I'm sure, that led us to go, whoa, 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 this unbridled capitalism thing isn't working. The system doesn't self-steer well. It leads to a race to the bottom. How can we handle this? And we came up with a solution that I'm sure you're all familiar with. Instead of figuring out how to make it self-steer, which we didn't know how to do, and we probably couldn't have at that point, we set floors. You can't behave any worse than this. Right? You got to pay people at least this much. You got to meet at least this level of food quality standard. You have to have this level of health and safety. You can't pollute any more than this. And we use the violent apparatus of the state to enforce these floors. Well, that's a better than nothing system, right? Absolutely better than nothing. But there's all kinds of problems there in terms of regulatory capture, meaning the very industry that's being regulated has a huge incentive to shape that legislation in ways that benefit it, and the population as a whole doesn't really have, it's a tiny issue for them, and so there's this imbalance, and so you get pressure, downward pressure on all of these floors. But the other piece is that type of regulatory system can sort of work in a nation. But we don't live in a nation. We live in a global society where manufacturing and trade and capitalism operates in an international context. And we can set a minimum wage in our country, but in an international context that doesn't have a global minimum wage, that means all the jobs go elsewhere. And so every country faces downward pressure. Sure, you could be good to your people in terms of pollution or jobs or whatever, but as soon as you do, you're going to get punished. It's a prisoner's dilemma because of the structure of the system. Nobody voted to do it that way. It's just how the system happens to work. And so our current mechanisms for steering steer us poorly. We accidentally shoot ourselves in the foot on an ongoing basis.
That's what I mean by complicit corruption. Exactly.
So, Holochain, how would it be better? Well, the goal is to actually enable that adjacent sense making. So that it's not just price that you can pull up, but you can pay attention to whatever the signals are that are relevant to you. But if you're interested in knowing from the sources that you trust, was this made with slaves? How long is this going to last? Is it recyclable? Is it supporting the pollution of a river? If those are things that you care about, you can gain the ability to sense them. And you don't have to have everybody else agreeing about that specific set of things before you're able to. You can pull out this piece from here, and this piece from there, and this piece from here, and this piece from there, and you can make sense of the world in ways that work for you. Now there's a hitch here, and this is not really Holochain's mission. This is probably more my personal mission. I think that what the real big game is in all of this is actually a shift in regulatory burden. Right now, the regulatory burden, because it's too complicated for each of us to spend months doing a project to figure out whether to buy this loaf of bread or that loaf of bread, because the research process itself to really understand that choice is far too complicated for anybody to take on. We don't do regulation at that level. We do regulation at the state level. We go, they'll set the floors and they'll negotiate international treaties, and if it's in the market, I can buy it. That's kind of the level at which we do it. It's the regulatory burden lands at the state. I think if we can make the difficulty of acquiring the information that we find relevant low enough, if we can make it so you go, click, okay. If that's how hard it is, the burden shifts. It actually shifts to individuals. Because when I'm running a bakery and I go, if I buy that flour, it's made with slaves. Well, there's another piece of information I need to pay attention to. What do my customers care about? Do they care whether it's made with slaves? And if they don't, we'll see the kind of complicity that you're worried about. But if they do, suddenly I care too. And so what it does is it actually, by making it easy enough for an individual to sense what the outcomes would be of supporting this, and to sense what the communities care about that they are hoping to interact with, they start to have to make some trade-off decisions. Well, here's my options. What do they care about? Okay. And it's only if that gets really simple and easy that others will actually expect you to have done something about it. But if it is that easy, and you show up at the party wearing slave jeans, he's going to go, hey, what's going on there, slaver? Right? Others will judge you for something that you absolutely had the capacity to do something about and didn't. Because you would at that point be actively and knowingly, or at least negligently, supporting systems that lead us to a place we don't want to live in, or at least they don't want to live in. And I don't think this leads us to utopia. I don't think it leads us to a world where, and we will all be perfect. But I think it enables us to self-steer far better because it enables distributed steering rather than centralized steering. That was deep in the weeds.
That was good. So why don't we open it up to the room again
Yeah.
and see what you are thinking and wondering about.
Yeah, on that, do you really, I mean, I'm sure for the people that really, or the group of the society that want to have the real information and that sort of are ready to handle the painful real information, that is a big chunk of the population for sure. I think this is great and so on. But in current systems, some of that information is actually not so hard to get to also. And there is a big part of the population today that prefer to believe whatever it is in God, or that the earth is flat, or that that was better to do Brexit or whatever. And those one will confirm, in your system, would confirm things that maybe I consider as totally wrong. Right? It will just, isn't it a risk that this will divide even worse? Because of the, I mean, I'm not saying that the centralized systems take the responsibility to actually sort of handle this problem that we see right now and sort of smoothen it out, or at least stop the most bad stuff. But peer-to-peer, without anyone looking from above, gives it means a lot of responsibility.
It does. And I'll sort of repeat that word. It means a lot of response ability. It means that those peers are expected to respond only if they are capable of responding. If they are able to respond, then others will expect them to. It doesn't lead to utopia. If people go, I don't care, I don't care, I don't care, and the folks around them go, yeah, we don't care either, that may be how it goes for them. And other communities may decide to turn towards them. They don't care either, or turn away from them. I don't really want to sell you bread. And there's a couple of pieces here. I do think the pressure that our peers put on us is real. And that when you live in a small village context, it's the primary way in which that community steers. When you get to a world where it's millions or billions of people, it becomes really hard to know who you're interacting with, and that kind of goes away. And at some level, I'm hoping to enable the peer pressure stuff to become available again. Now, that doesn't mean those people get forced into behaving in certain ways. But if I'm hoping to interact with you, suddenly I need to be sensitive to what it is that you care about. I need to pay attention to that in order to maintain a relationship. There's another side to this, and this is, I think, really common in today's world. We assume that division is bad, and I want to challenge that assumption a little bit. Communities that have diversity in them, diversity in terms of their beliefs, diversity in terms of the things that they focus on, diversity in terms of the ways of living that they practice. In a world that's changing quickly, the community that is not a monoculture is much more likely to thrive. The community that has diversity is much more likely to have some learning available to it that may be applicable in that new context. Not all diversities are good. Not all diversities are desirable from any particular person's perspective. But diversity is desirable. And not just in a politically correct way, in a very practical way. The reason that biology is so persistent is because it has tons of diversity. It's not all one type of organism. There's all sorts of different organisms thriving in different contexts, having different sets of relationships. And if I were to describe what Holochain is trying to enable, we're trying to enable new forms of social organization, we call social organisms, that sort of mimic the patterns of biological organization. So the thing that DNA enabled, which was sort of like the code for how to organize a biological organism, a creature of some sort of plant, an animal, etc. We're seeing Holochain as a pattern similar to DNA, but that can enable social organisms. We want to enable many of those, many wide varieties of social organisms that will be appropriate to different contexts. And that individuals can go, wow, that pattern's really useful. I want to use that pattern. And I want to add to it this and this and this. Other questions? Or yeah.
How would you apply this to news media and fake news, and how to organize news in a way? That's
yeah. Well, news is interesting in that we think of news as an industry, right? Like that's the world that we grew up in, most of us. So we think of it as something that gets delivered by a business. Let's go back a ways. What was news 10,000 years ago?
Town crier.
Town crier? Gossip?
Yeah.
Right?
back to the village.
Yeah. It was, did you see what Jimmy did? Right? And what Jimmy did might have been brilliant. And so innovation is spreading across the community. What Jimmy did might have been terrible. So the potential for Jimmy to lose access to a dinner invite next week might be spreading across the community. That was what news was. And we didn't share everything with everyone. We chose to share pieces of information in relationships where that felt like it was relevant, where that felt contextually relevant. You're trying to do something right now. Oh, I saw this great thing that Jimmy did last week. You might try the technique that he had. Now, I didn't bring that up just to anybody. I brought it up when it was relevant. And that's how information flows in a community. News, as we've thought about it, was the industrial era version of how can we get information flowing in a community. And it was largely a curation process, a let's weed out the bad stuff. We will organize, and we will go and do research, and then we will pull that together, and we will interpret it, and we will write up a little sentence, and then we'll distribute to thousands of people, and they'll each pay us. And so it's got a business model that makes this centralized collection of information and distribution of information pencil, right? It makes money. What we're talking about is the reverse of that. It's the distributed generation, subscription or reception, analysis, remix, publication of information. It's enabling us to pay attention to those types of things. And if I'm to like pull it out of the abstract a little bit, I think the solution to fake news is metadata. It's at some level, other people being able to go, no, yes, and not just anonymously, but being able to sort of put their skin in the game and say, this is bullshit, pardon me, but this is a lie, here's why it's a lie, etc. And they can do that with text, but I think that what we're going to see is the rise of a whole new generation of currencies, and not just money-like currencies, but a real diverse ecosystem of signalings. We use the word currency in our project a little differently than others. We think of it as any sort of signaling system where members of a particular group may be paying attention to specific claims about sweatshops or doing greenwashing type stuff. And they will reward organizations that have passed a particular test or process or whatever and satisfied their criteria. And others will want to pay attention to that because those others trust that particular organization. But they're able to take that signal and combine it with others and distill those into something discrete, some average or some little graphic that enables that individual to make sense of the world at the glance of an eye, even though they're pulling in huge amounts of information. But it's been compressed thanks to these currencies, and it's been compressed in a custom way that they have found relevant. We don't have the bandwidth to pay attention to all the information that's available. Herbert Simon said, the cost of information is attention. Right? More information, you still have limited attention. The way in which you can make sense of that information is by it being compressed, by somebody synthesizing it. And that's what currencies do. But when you think of currencies in the way that we do, where it's not just coin-like things, it's things like a diploma. A diploma from a university in engineering, you know, I've got a diploma from MIT in mechanical engineering. I don't, but somebody does, right? That's a currency. It distills down several years worth of activity into a little thing that might open up a job interview. Now, I can't sell it, but it gives me access to opportunities that I might not otherwise have because it condenses the information to a form that that party can go, okay, yeah, maybe I'll give him a job interview without having had to sit alongside me for that entire 4 years. So by condensing signals in a way where we don't all have to agree on it, that's how I think we're going to solve the fake news problem. But I think it'll allow us to solve a lot of other problems as well. Yeah?
Hi. Couple technical questions. When these communities have like a side chain, for lack of better terms, what it sounds like, is there a main chain that validates these side chains? And then are there nodes that run that? That's probably a yes or no question. Can I ask a few more?
You can. So let me start with that one.
Okay.
The side chain architecture comes out of blockchain. And it's a side effect of the fact that they are doing sensing at a network layer. Right? They're centralizing perspective at the network layer, and they're trying to generate truth at that network layer. From the perspective of the networks, this is the truth. Right? And blockchains have as a feature or a bug that a bigger community that is more resource intensive is more secure because it's harder to attack. They have a vulnerability called 51% attack, which means if you can control just a little over half of the computers on the network, you can make up history.
Well, you can make the present.
You could make the past, but potentially, right? You can, okay. And others will treat that as if it's the truth.
Correct.
Okay. Because of that, they've used this sidechain architecture to make it so that a smaller network can still be considered secure by piggybacking on the security of a larger network. Holochain isn't generating consensus. We're not using that same architecture. And so the relationship between two chains is not at a network level. It could be, they could do something like that, but usually it's not the network that is linked together. It's an individual stating for themselves, I'm willing to take something from this space that I trust, and I'm wanting to do something with it over in this other space. And the party that I'm looking to interact with there, they get to decide whether they're trusting this. If they have no existing relationship with this community and they have no way of checking the signatures or whatever else, it'd be like showing up in the middle of the Amazon with a good credit score to convince somebody that you can make dinner, right? That's a signal that is irrelevant from a community that they don't know. That's worthless. Reputation is about bridging social relationships, which requires some existing social relationship. You're willing to shortcut your own sense-making because you know somebody else and you're willing to trust what they had said about me. You didn't have to learn it in person. You're willing to waste 30 minutes of your time because you trust that MIT doesn't just give out degrees to anybody. There's also a weirdness of our current system in that you trust that because somebody said they have a degree from MIT, they actually do. We don't normally check those things, although that will probably change in the next few years as that gets significantly easier. Okay, I hope that answered the first question. Does it change the other questions?
Not at all.
Okay.
I just looked.
And let's do one more, and then we'll come back to less technical stuff.
Yeah, I'll try to keep it short.
Wait. Breathe for a second and pick between the questions that you have.
Yeah. I know which one I'd like to ask. I saw on your webpage that you're doing an ICO.
Yes.
With Ether request for comment, 20 token, humble amount of capital being raised. That's interesting. What's the utility of that token?
So an ERC20 token is a fairly standard smart contract on the Ethereum blockchain. Ethereum is one of the largest blockchains out there. This is the mechanism that many, if not most, ICOs have used for doing an initial coin offering. So we are calling our ICO an initial community offering because the system that we're actually going to be running doesn't have coins. It's not a part of our architecture. But we are doing ERC20 tokens, or coins, as our fundraising mechanism. People purchase these. You had mentioned the amount. We're initially releasing 2.5 million euros worth. We're potentially willing to accept up to 25 million euros, but that depends on how much participation we see in our system. So if there's a ton of people signing up and building applications and participating in developer events, we'll release more more tokens, because we expect to have to support a larger ecosystem. But we don't want to raise more money than we need, because we think that would be really irresponsible. And we also have a built-in business model. So to be very clear, this ICO is not for Holochain. This ICO is for a particular application built on top of Holochain. It's a service app that enables a peer-to-peer Holochain app to speak to anybody using a web browser. So just to make that visible, if we're running peer-to-peer Airbnb, great, we've got this system that works the way we want it to work, and we're paying attention to, is it noisy or whatever the things are that we wanted to pay attention to. That doesn't mean we only want to rent to people who are geeky, technical, early adopters of Holochain technology. Holo makes it so that a few of us could go, hey, you can use some of the spare computing power on my device, my laptop, my desktop, and I'll serve out websites to anybody who wants to come visit. So Matthew's grandmother knows how to open a web browser and type in a URL, and that's all it takes for her to book a room in this peer-to-peer app space because of Holo. So we think that's a really useful service app that's going to be used widely in the Holochain ecosystem. We have a business model there. The participants get compensated in what's called Holo Fuel. When they do that hosting, that web hosting work, the developer or the community as a whole recognizes that contribution by paying them in Holo Fuel, and that's a rate that they are setting themselves. They're offering, and the developer is, or the payer is offering, and they come to some settlement, and then cool, they do some hosting, and occasionally they settle that transaction and they get paid. I can go into more of that if there's questions around how our mutual credit cryptocurrency works. But the ERC20 tokens are basically a pre-purchase of credits in this hosting ecosystem. They're a pre-purchase of computer services, essentially, that we are stating as an organization, hey, we are willing to give you storage and hosting for this type of stuff. We'll do it ourselves, but we're pricing it at a rate that we know our community can come in and undercut us, so that lots of other people can come in and deliver it for even cheaper, and they can make money on doing that. Oops.
No, it's yours.
Now it's mine. Terrible, terrible. So what are those tokens? They're a pre-purchase of the currency in that system. And they'll be redeemed. So that's not going to operate on the Ethereum blockchain. They're being issued there. They're tradable there until we launch Holo, and then people will redeem them out, get an account balance in this system, and then be able to use that for paying for hosting. Other questions? I might make one more point about hosting.
I
Just-
have a question.
Okay.
Okay, so holofuel.
Yeah.
All right. Here's what I want to see. Is first of all, I'm a little radical,
No.
just a little bit, and I really want to see conversation, inquiry, research, activities, community, organization around systems change. Basically, we got to change our system, and we got to change it pretty quick.
Yeah.
And you can't just pick a piece of the system out and fix it and hope that you're going to get incremental change. We tried that for the last 50 years, and it didn't work. Systems change requires something different. So economy is at the core of this. And every time you say something's at the core of it, you realize that nothing's really alone at the core of it, because ecology is at the core of this, because our caring and our capacity for integrity is at the core of this. Our understanding of community is at the core of this.
And you're distinguishing this from economy?
Exactly. Exactly. Okay, so this is why I wanted to ask you more about holofuel, because to my great disappointment, I mean, having been at least a little bit interested in blockchain, I have seen what happened to Bitcoin and the way that it turned into a get-rich-quick scheme. I mean, with the kind of greed and appetite that I have rarely actually seen in my life. So in the midst of this moment of desperately needing to reevaluate how we interact, transaction and interaction need to be really closely perceived and cared for. Because so deep is this impulse to think of an interaction as a transaction. And how do we get to a new level there? How can we begin to shift our perception of what it means to be in community? Not only with our own 40 trillion organisms, but with our families, our communities, and the larger biosphere. So do you think that it's possible that the way that holofuel is organized could help with that?
Holofuel itself? Yeah. Holochain, yeah. Holofuel is sort of a money-like pattern. It's a credit system. It's a mutual credit system. It's basically double entry accounting. I've got an account balance. You have an account balance. Hey, you want to pay me? Great. Your account goes down. My account goes up. You sign it. I sign it. We share it to everybody else. They go, yep. That's what happened. They both signed that thing, and so this is how we're going to see it now. But
So
it's a
can we
money-like
get
pattern.
holofuel billionaires? Is that going to happen?
Maybe. Though we designed the currency very differently than how blockchain's designed, because blockchain wasn't designed by currency designers and Holochain was. Our founders are currency designers. That's how they met. They met at an alternative currencies conference, and they weren't just interested in money-like currencies.
Mm-hmm.
Holochain comes out of something called the Meta Currency Project. And you can Google this. We've done a bunch of work on what we call deep wealth. Deep wealth has to do with paying attention to all of the layers of interaction and flows that you just spoke about that make a community thrive. At different layers of wealth, you have different types of currency that can make activity or flows of activity visible. For us, the word currency we really use, we're trying to repurpose it, as I mentioned before. Currency comes out of the Latin currere, meaning to flow or run. So currency enables you to see flows. Currencies enable us to see flows of activity in a community or in a system. So a pulse enables us to see my heart rate. I can't sell you my pulse. There's no transaction available there. But I could run faster if I wanted my pulse to come up. It's a signal that enables me to then make some decisions and change behavior in order to adjust the system. Money-like currencies are not the only form of transactional currencies, but they foster transaction. They foster closed relationships. In fact, from my perspective, the invention of money came about to solve a particular problem. Hey, how do I interact with somebody who I don't have a relationship with? Prior to money, our relationships looked much more like, and it wasn't barter that came before money. That's a fiction. It never happened. There was no society that regulated themselves with barter. Right? Societies regulated themselves with essentially credit. Once we got to paper stuff, maybe it was IOUs, but before that it was, hey, can you help me with something? Sure. And if somebody didn't help anybody in the community for quite a while in a row, people would be like, you ever notice that she never picks up a hammer? And that person would lose status. There would become peer pressure to reshape the flows. It wasn't a money system. It was a set of relationships, not transactions. Different currencies enable different forms of relationship. From our perspective, currencies aren't just about money, and they're not even just about measurement. They're about making things visible. And you can make things visible in ways that are visible only to you. You can make things visible in ways that are visible only to you and some other people that you choose to share something with. You can make things visible in ways that are visible to the entire group. And each of those is a design decision in terms of that particular currency or set of currencies. No one currency is going to be appropriate for all situations. No single currency is going to be appropriate for helping a whole community steer itself because there's a bunch of things that they're going to want to pay attention to. But, I don't know, a simple one like, did you pick your kid up on time, is a signal. Doesn't mean you're evil, doesn't mean you're good, doesn't mean you're bad. But if I have to work right at 5 and I definitely have to go, I might choose not to watch your kid tonight, even though you offer to pay significantly more money. Somebody else might. They'll take you up on that offer. But me, I can't take that risk. It's a signal that enables some steering. It's not a transaction thing. It's just an information thing. Yeah.
So it's okay if we just continue, or are you wanting to dive in? These guys are looking like they could use some time to talk.
Yeah. Any questions?
A question about hardware. Is it like Tor network that you have nodes, you're running on nodes? So what kind of hardware? Can you run it on a Raspberry Pi?
Yes. So the question was, is it like Tor? Do you need nodes? Can you run it on a Raspberry Pi? So there's two things here. There's Holochain, and there's Holo, which is that one application. Holochain, you can run 50 applications on a Raspberry Pi. Right? You can run 50 Facebook-sized applications on a Raspberry Pi, meaning it's just the Raspberry Pis running the app. You can have Facebook, just Raspberry Pis. No big data warehouse in Silicon Valley doing that application. That's also useful because that makes it so you don't have to talk to Silicon Valley. So even if we're in a disaster zone where you were cut off from the global internet, you can still be running a completely functional application because you've got peers. And you're able to pass information around to anybody that the message can hop to. So you can run Holochain applications on mesh networks. Holo, if you're doing this web hosting stuff, you're probably not going to want to run that on your phone. One of our Holo ports, which is hardware that we were selling as part of our crowdfunding campaign we did earlier this year, one of those is essentially a Raspberry Pi-like device that you can plug into an existing external hard drive and be hosting with that. There are also higher-end versions, but that was the cheap one. That was the $100 option. Because Holo is a hosting system, where how quickly you're able to respond to something matters, and people are probably going to get reputation in the system as well for, hey, how fast is your device? Larger devices may be helpful there. But it's specifically designed in a way where if you set up a big warehouse, you don't gain any significant advantage over having just one device. We wanted even that Holo layer to be very peer-to-peer, very distributed. And you don't have to buy a device from us. We were selling these so that we had an initial foundation layer of devices on the network that were top quality devices that were on 24 hours a day, so that when Matt's grandma goes to look up the website's there. Right, so we just needed a foundation layer to launch the network. We were fortunate when we did our crowdfunding campaign. We ended up becoming very quickly the top project on Indiegogo, which is a popular crowdfunding website. And we more than doubled, we nearly tripled our goals for the project. So we've got about 1,000 devices that are going to be launching this spring or summer. And then soon after that, we'll have free software that people can download and use on their own computer to do that type of hosting and earn Holo Fuel. The one other thing I'll say there, sometimes people will ask me the question of, yeah, but is there going to be that much? I mean, is hosting really a thing that's worth something? Like, that seems so small. Amazon is one of the largest companies on the planet. One of the businesses that they run is a web hosting business called Amazon Web Services. That business makes up about 10% of their revenues, but it's responsible for more profit than the entire rest of their company combined. So web hosting is Amazon's cash cow. It basically subsidizes significant chunks of the rest of their business. We think of Holo as doing to Amazon's cash cow what Uber did to taxis. We want to put it into the hands of all these humans who have spare capacity on their laptops, desktops, etc. We have idle assets, much more computing power sitting at home than any company has. And we want people to be recognized for those contributions in a way that works for them. And so Holo is designed to enable that and foster that type of activity. Now that said, we have a little nuance with Holo in that you don't have to get recognized with Holo Fuel. If you do, if you're asking to get paid in Holo Fuel, great. The transactions all happen, da-da-da, the network does its thing. We, the organization, take a transaction fee. It's a 1% or less transaction fee, and that's our business model. That's how we're supporting the growth of Holo. It's also how we're supporting the maturation of Holochain. Holochain we're giving away to the world for free. It's a pattern that you could use without us even knowing about it. You might use it in your community. There's definitely no way for us to monetize it. And we think that's appropriate. We want that layer to be given away for free so that it can evolve and do what it needs to do. But in order to mature it, we need to subsidize that. And so 50% of the revenues from Holo go directly into the Holochain Foundation to try to support the growth of that ecosystem. Both in terms of the code and making it secure, but also education and making tools that make it easier for people to build apps. There was another question.
Yeah, so I enjoyed the discussion, but my skeptical mind is just trying to figure out do I trust you? Do I trust this?
Slick-haired.
No, but I mean
Silicon Valley.
So first of all, where are we right now? Could I go home and write the Hello World app tonight?
Yes, absolutely.
And what do you not have today?
Sure.
What's missing?
Yep. Holochain is in an alpha release. In October, we launched our alpha. We called it the Adventurer release. It's for the adventurous, meaning don't build mission-critical stuff. We haven't done a security on it. Build your Hello World app. Build your peer-to-peer Twitter. In fact, we've already got one, and people are improving it every day. We've got somebody else working on a peer-to-peer Slack that should be up in a week or two, hopefully, our first version. We have people building peer-to-peer wikis and all sorts of stuff. If you go into our online community, chat.holochain.net or .org, there's over 1,000 people that are building applications and talking about them and just collaborating and conspiring for what are the things that you want to build. Holo is designed, but not yet built. So the reason that we're doing this initial community offering is twofold. One, we need to build Holo, get that live and running. And 2, we need to mature Holochain. We need to get the underlying infrastructure layer of Holochain matured quite a bit, do some security audits to make sure that it's not vulnerable in various ways, so that that becomes something that you could build a banking system on top of, or something that was mission critical in that way. Does that answer the question?
Don't trust him though.
Yeah. Yeah. Trust but verify. Other questions?
But if I can build on that,
Sure.
like, what's the long-term role of Holochain as a company? Like, is there any dependency long-term that, like, it's like Google, don't be evil. Like,
Yeah.
what if you are good now, but you become evil in 5 years?
Yeah,
and
sure.
all of your company, like, what will then happen?
So we're a little odd. We're basically a bunch of hippies who were trying to change the world and desperately wanted to do it well. So this has been a project that's gone on for over a decade. I've been working on my own on these things for 11 years, but I didn't meet the founders of the Metacurrency project until about 4 years ago. And at that time, there had been a bunch of different people who had worked on it. But at that time, there were 3 main people doing kind of daily activities on the project, and that was Arthur Brock, Eric Harris Brown, and Fernanda Ibarra. And so because we're hippies, a lot of our focus has been how do we launch this thing and grow it in a way that isn't going to get steered wrong. So your concern, we share. What are some of the things that we've done unusual? Well, again, Holochain, we're trying to make it so it doesn't have a business model. It doesn't really. It has a business model. Its business model is to be subsidized by this other stuff, right? But it doesn't have a built-in cryptocurrency thing that's going to fuel it through its use. Holo has a business model, and Holo does not own Holochain. It's going to be a separate entity. Holo is a for-profit organization. We're also going to set up an application incubator to try to get a bunch of apps out into the world and help entrepreneurs and visionaries who have ideas to make sure that those get supported and built. We have some other designs for more radical stuff like application commonses and things, but we don't need to go into all those details right now. Holochain, right from the get-go, we're planning to have some portion of the revenues that are coming into Holo, I said Holochain, pardon me, Holo, some portion of the revenues that are coming into Holo, we're actually planning to have steered by the community. There's a group called Inspiral that was originally based out of New Zealand, and they have some really interesting tools, Lumio and CoBudget. CoBudget is kind of this, hey, how do we as a community make decisions about how we want to spend money? We're looking to sort of implement something similar to that pattern in Holo, initially with maybe 1 or 3%, somewhere in that range. The people who are actually running the system, the developers and the hosts running the system, they get to decide, how do we want that money spent? Do we want new languages? Do we want new tools? Do we want this security audit done? And over time, we intend to actually have that percentage increase until it's entirely controlled by the community. We want them, as the community matures in its own processes, we want the community to control more and more of the budget of Holo. For us, Holo is a tool. It's a stepping stone to try to bring this new pattern of how to communicate and coordinate into the world. What does that mean? Well, it means a few things. 1, we couldn't take any venture capital. 2, we couldn't give any equity away, period. We couldn't give equity away to our employees. So I don't own any of Holo. The only people who are owning Holo are the 2 co-founders who are closely holding it so that we can hand it over to the community. Because we didn't want to make promises of you will get infinite profits into the future to anybody, because that's not the future that we wanted to create. We wanted to bootstrap a new pattern, not extract a bunch of wealth. And we want resources, all sorts of resources, developer talent and people's visions and money as well, to come into this ecosystem, but we were really trying to solve for that. How do we nurture an ecosystem into existence? Not how can we make $1 billion personally. You had asked earlier, are there going to be Holo fuel billionaires? There may be, I don't know. I really don't. But it wasn't designed for that. If you read through our currency white paper and our green paper, which if you're going to read stuff, don't read the Holochain white paper. It's you can read it, but it's a lot of math. It's not super user friendly. There are lots of other places that we give a much more human readable version, but that is like the academic, we are proving that this thing is secure and here's the math to back it up white paper. Our green paper for Holo goes in a fair bit into what Holochain is about, and our currency paper for Holo does as well. I think there was something else I wanted to say, but I don't remember what it was. I think we've gone pretty long.
Yeah, I feel like unless there's any burning questions or comments or.
Just one last question.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
the Holochain is no one owns it, and it's an open source protocol.
Well, there's going to be a foundation that will own it. It's separate from Holo, and it is open source. I think the license currently is a GPL license, a GNU public license, or library. We are considering inventing a new kind of license, but we haven't implemented that yet. So right now we're using GPL. That new kind of license is something that actually would differentiate between somebody who's using this as a human person and somebody who's using this as a corporation. But we're calling it the Human Commons license, but that's not been implemented yet. But the code is open source and will remain so. The details of what flavor of open source, it may shift, but that's for Holochain. Okay, everybody take one deep breath. Any curiosities or comments? Actually, I'll ask for comments. What comes to you? Yeah.
Do you have any enemies? Or will there be any? Do you suspect?
We're not trying to manufacture them.
Maybe they were already out there, and you're sort of messing up the system that they're living from and creating change, and they're not very fond of it.
Some folks might end up perceiving us as a threat. I'm hopeful that many of them will see us as an opportunity. That instead of trying to kill that new pattern, they recognize that if they instead start trying to use that pattern, it actually gives them a huge advantage. That whether that's a government or a for-profit corporation, oh wow, if we do it this way, that whole we're a big company, so we're not good at doing new stuff, that might shift, right? So that's my hope. At the same time, we've built this in a distributed way, so that even if I got assassinated, or the other technical leads got assassinated, and I'm not one of those guys, so don't get me, that wouldn't stop it, right? It's a pattern that anybody can take and borrow and use and build on. So, but no, I'm sure we'll have people who feel threatened.
Yeah,
I'm hopeful that they can
I'm
also see.
not specifically on the personal level, but I mean, there's a lot of power concentrated, as you said before, and if you do this, maybe they will lose part of the power. And
my hope is that we don't gain attention before we don't gain too much attention before we gain capacity. That this starts to gain attention as it demonstrates its capacity for more vibrant patterns and more vibrant steering. And if it gains attention that way, I think people will see it for the possibilities that it enables, even if others see it as a risk. And when people see something as a threat, it also drives adoption. The people who adopted blockchain first were the banks. Guess who blockchain was gunning for? They specifically called out the banks as the system that they wanted to disrupt right from the get-go. Fear is an incredible motivator of change. Right? So they might see us as a threat, and that might actually lead them to have the political will within an organization, not just one individual, but a whole organization being willing to try something new. Other comments?
I have
Yep.
a question for you, sort of, when it comes to have you been sort of, are you happy with the answers when it comes to the support of the ecosystems, or do you think this is just another outside of it? And
Okay,
not
so what
helping you?
I love your question there because I mean, I know there's people in this room who have been watching the circle economy, the sharing economy, the caring economy, the green economy, the blue economy, right? I'm just really happy that you didn't try to give me a snow job on that. Because the fact is that it's at the level of culture. And what world we perceive is the world we engage in. So, it would have been tempting for him to say, oh yeah, Holo fuel is going to build community and it's going to build our sense of responsibility to each other and our microflora. But luckily, you didn't do that because actually nothing can do that. I mean, that's really at the level of culture. And how do we build that and develop that? We build it and develop it through perception. So hopefully what I see as being the big sort of benefit of the Holochain is that it does bring new levels of relational interdependency into view and into our everyday lives, so that there's not this kind of blind numbness to all of the forms of life that it takes to get through the day that we're not interacting with. I think most of us know that by lunchtime we have engaged in, from our breakfast cereal to the child labor that makes our genes, to the chemicals in our on our peaches, to the way the cows are treated that make the yogurt, to the chemicals in our shampoo, to the way that to our pharmaceuticals that we need to take, that we've contributed to the destruction of the world in 25 different ways before lunchtime, none of which we had any say in. Because I would love to live in a parallel reality where I wasn't destroying the world with everything I did, but that parallel reality isn't here for me to live in. So how do we get there from here? And I think that I'm glad to have that responsibility remain with us. I don't think there's any model or code or particular form of jurisdiction or policy that can cure us collectively of our greed. That's pretty much up to us. And if we want to misuse Holochain, I'm pretty sure we can find a way. So, I think that. Do you think that's fair?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You passed the test.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you talked about currency, and one thing for me about currency is, and I'm not talking about currency as in flow. I'm talking about currency as in coin, as in money. Is that it gives us the opportunity to not see. It's a context eraser, a relationship eraser. If I try to give Matthew a banana, and Matthew's staying in my sofa, and he's, that banana transaction for him is inside our relationship. But it's also inside the relationship of the fact that it's February in Sweden, and what are we doing with bananas, right? And so, so there's a lot of relational context in the giving or the interaction with this banana. If he just gives me 10 crowns for that banana, all that relationship is vanished. The banana's worth 10 crowns, period. And all the context is gone. So I'm interested in the question of how do we get the context and our perception of context back into our interactions so that they are not trivialized in the trade of money, which makes it easy. I mean, prostitution is a great example. You don't have to deal with the context or the relationships. It's just a money transaction. And it's all erased. The history of that person, everything behind that whole interaction. And when I go and buy these jeans, it's just a money transaction. I don't have to think about where they came from. So I think that part of what we're looking at is how do we bring those relationships back into view. Maybe they never have been in view. Certainly not with global economies and industries. But reality, we have really a lot of change to make, and it's really not looking like it's going to be very comfortable. So I'm not tempted to put a rosy glow on it. I remember sitting in workshops on sustainable economies in the early part, in like 06, 07, and they were just selling this version of this, the future's going to be great. We're going to save the world and we're going to get rich doing it. And it was like, oh, something's not right with this. Something's just not right. And, it's not right. That's not how we're going to get there. And so what do we do with our relationship to economy and the various things that means? Our food, our clothing, our shelter, our health. What is health? What is wealth? How do we reframe that stuff? So I don't know. I don't want to be. I don't really want to be bullshitted about that anymore.
I'm glad for
To
that.
be perfectly honest, I'm all about let's keep this on the level now and be real.
Yeah.
Because I'm sorry, but I don't think there's a lot of hope for getting rich and saving the world. We might have to choose. And that's okay with me. I definitely choose getting rich. No.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew Schutte, so much. I'm so admirative.
Thank you, Daniel and Nav, for
Yeah.
hosting. Wonderful.